Man, speaking of adaptations, this one is a bit of a doozy. Back before Berserk became the proper juggernaut that it would be known as, there were some slim pickings in the States. Broken translations, no proper book releases, tape trading and word of mouth. Anime and manga is in a somewhat better place than where it once was. Somewhat. The modern era has brought its own problems and dilemmas well worth going into, but that's a story for another time and by someone who's better read on the topic. All I'm saying is that streaming services don't give back to the animators, which is a load of horsecock and shouldn't be the norm. Merchandise is the royalty. Anywho, like, comment, subscribe, and share the video around. Or don't, I ain't your Uncle Josuke, who's far younger than his nephew. What is there to say about Berserk? Quite a bit, seeing as it's a masterclass of artistry that has already gone down in history as Kentaro Miura's, God rest his beautiful soul, magnum opus exploring humanity's will to struggle and fight on against the precipice. Epic is the word for it, and not as an adjective, but noun. It fits alongside Lord of the Rings as a shining example of the medieval fantasy genre, and because I'm not much of a Song of Fire and Ice guy, Berserk is my example of dark fantasy. This is where I curb expectations though, as this history won't be a full-on examination of where it started. I can get away with that in the Kamen Rider Kuga video because that game had nothing else going for it besides gameplay, while here, there actually is a full-on plot to discuss in some capacity. Joyous day, because that leaves little but table scraps for us here, but I digress. So our starting point comes to us right around volumes 22 and 23 of the Berserk manga. That right there should give you a good enough clue as to why a game was made for the property. Berserk had finally hit its stride in the post-Golden Age arc landscape the manga had found itself in. For a brief run-through on Berserk, or brief enough for this show, like most things, it is separated into arcs, the main ones worth mentioning here being Black Swordsman, Golden Age, and Conviction/Millennium Falcon. Berserk opens up, as most of my favorite stories tend to do, in media res, where we see Guts, our main character, deep in his Black Swordsman persona. He's cold, decidedly deadly, and hunts monsters/demons who actively chase both him and his traveling partner, a woman by the name of Casca, who seems to suffer from some form of degradation. She's a grown woman, but acts like a child. Also, somewhere in there is an elf by the name of Puck, who is the comedy relief in between all the nightmare fuel. Like broadsiding a bunch of evil fairies that turn back into human kids when they die. Spoiler! Berserk is that kind of manga, even if I'm jumping into the Conviction arc for that one. Someone has to represent Rosen, because no other adaptation wants to touch that one with a 10-foot pole. Black Swordsman goes on for 3 volumes or books, giving us a little insight into the world that Berserk takes place in, outside of introducing characters that have a history of our guy, and hinting towards some great story that happened in the past. That's because the following 11 volumes cover what is called the Golden Age arc, a massive backstory that explains why everything is what it is in the present. By far, it is Berserk's most popular arc, giving us a Guts that isn't all stone and steel, a Casca who's kick-ass, a bunch of relatable side characters, and Griffith, whose derangement would be the cause of Guts' adoption of the Black Swordsman, and a whole slew of other issues. Golden Age is essentially the Star Wars prequels if they were good, exploring interpersonal relationships, trauma, social standing, and dreams. It can't be understated that you could honestly make Berserk just the Golden Age arc, and it would still be considered one of the greatest stories of all time. time. To describe how long the setup is in years, Berserk Volumes 1 to 3 took about a year for publication, beginning in November 1990 and ending in October 91. The first proper Golden Age arc book was published in February 92, the storyline not seeing completion until 97. 5 years. And it's not like Miura stopped after Golden Age was finished. The last book in the arc shares real estate with a flash forward back to the present to begin the Conviction arc. Another important storyline in Berserk's already stacked lineup, Conviction begins the healing process for Guts as he learns to let people back into his life, starting the formation of what would be his new band as the likes of Farnese, Serpico, and Isidro, alongside Shirky, Elvira, Roderick, and Magnifico, introduced in Millennium Falcon, with Azan, who is a satellite member for a good while, and Isma joining in the Fantasia arc, becoming his traveling partners and teammates as the group searches for a cure to Casca's condition as they deal with the ramifications of what has happened to their world, particularly in Volume 22. At the end of the Golden Age arc, Griffith, stripped of literally everything and left a husk, uses the Crimson Baylet, a trinket capable of ascending a person past humanity through sacrifice, as a catalyst for an event called the Eclipse, summoning the God Hand members Void, Conrad, Ubik, and Slayon, and are in essence the greater scope villains of the story, unless you still love the idea of evil. Griffith sacrifices the whole of the Band of the Hog, his war band that includes Guts and Casca, to ascend to the Berserk equivalent of Demon Princedom. Newly christened Femto, not to be confused with Vimto, Griffith personally sees to Guts' mental anguish during the finale of the Eclipse. He rapes Casca right in front of a pinned-down Guts, who, try as he might, can't escape from the Apostles, Berserk's name for demon/higher-tier monsters, holding him back, and he ultimately loses an eye and a hand. Out of everyone that accompanied Griffith, as Rickard wasn't in the Eclipse, only Guts and Casca escape, with the help of the ostensible Big Good Skull Knight, branded with the Mark of Sacrifice that burns whenever an otherworldly presence draws near, and you bet your ass it draws monsters and spirit alike to the duo like moths to a flame. Guts and Casca lie in the intersectionality. Both were fated to die in the Eclipse, but lived. As the Skull Knight tells Guts, "Struggle on, struggler. Struggle, challenge, and rise to struggle again. That's the only sword a struggler can use against death. Fight against fate," or as Terminator loves to bandy about, "No fate but what you make." The core thesis of Berserk. But as I've stepped into analysis territory instead of keeping to what amounts to an oral history of Berserk's storyline, Volume 22 marks the return of Griffith from the astral plane. As Femto, he can only traipse around in our world, not fully exist, like the rest of the God Hand. Thus, during the events of the Conviction arc, he sets into motion his own incarnation via the Egg Apostle and the Demon Child of Guts and Casca. Incarnated, or reincarnated as he lost his physical body when he became Femto, something, the cycle of Samsara. Volume 22 opens up with Griffith and Guts' reunion on the Hill of Swords, reintroducing Griffith as a key player in the story and effectively shattering the world of Berserk as Griffith's return opens a hole between the real world and astral plane, letting apostles, monsters, and other nasties to roam free and go about their business. So that's kinda where we're at. A sort of crossroads of storytelling in the best way possible, as Guts now has to factor in Griffith back into his life, and if he wants to continue the pursuit of revenge, or try to step away from that downward spiral while the people of Berserk clamber for a savior that Griffith takes the role of. Take mind that this is all happening in Japan only. America didn't get the first volume of Berserk until the Dark Horse publication in 2003. Most of what America knew about Berserk was either due to word of mouth via fan translations or those that could read Japanese, or via Berserk 97, a 25-episode series covering the Black Swordsman and Golden Age arcs airing between 97 and 98 on Japanese TV, with a VHS set coming out between 98 and 99. Again though, while Berserk 97 was licensed for an American debut, there were some struggles in regards to that. Christopher McDonald of the Anime News Network wrote back in 2002 that probably the biggest licensing story of the year was how Media Blasters snatched Berserk from Urban Vision's grasp. Urban Vision had been negotiating for the Berserk license for months. Clearly, they were having problems getting the license finalized. It seems that UV really wanted Berserk, but the Japanese wanted too much money for it. Whatever the sum of money, and it is said to be a very significant amount, it seems that Media Blasters was willing to pay it. At Anime Expo, only hours after Urban Vision repeated once again they were still working on finalizing the Berserk deal, Media Blasters announced that they had signed a contract for Berserk only a few days earlier. While another ANN writer, Scott Green, would later add, the Sci-Fi Channel talked to Media Blasters about airing the medieval action drama Berserk, but Media Blasters informed them the violence would require too many cuts. Media Blasters also stated they want to get the second season of Berserk, but they are waiting to see how well the series sells. The statement is puzzling because there is no second season of the Berserk anime series, nor has one been announced for production. Berserk 97 wouldn't see airtime at all in America, going straight to DVD and VHS in 2002 and 2003. So you were still up the creek unless you either tape traded for some fan subs / dubs or were a part of such groups. Why I'm being especially anal on this is because the topic of today saw a 99 release in Japan and 2000 release in America on Dreamcast only. Sword of the Berserk Guts' Rage was America's first look at the series, which would cause some problems as I'll get into. But while that may seem like a closer, as I usually bring up the drop date before going into the next tab, this is where the story becomes interesting outside of my efforts to find any documentation. That shit is locked in a vault somewhere. Firstly, the developer of Guts' Rage was Ukes in association with publishers ASCII Corporation and Eidos. Because I have a lack of solid evidence, I can only cast assumptions as to why the three were chosen. With Ukes, they had definitely adapted to the 3D model era pretty quickly, developing Underground, Classic, Evil Zone for the PlayStation 1, which gave them credibility in the anime game field, and, well, one of the characters in Evil Zone is basically Guts, so you do the math. Ukes didn't have much to their name since the 4 years they had been running, starting in 95 with Hermie Hopperhead. Literally only known for Evil Zone until 2000 when they went on an all-time run with WWE SmackDown, culminating in the shape of the SmackDown vs. Raw series and WWE 12. Also included are the Day of Reckoning games, Rumble Roses, the first 3 UFC Undisputed titles, and the sequel Berserk game. On to ASCII and Eidos. Your guess is as good as mine. ASCII was almost out the industry door at this point, backing the likes of Seaman and Galarians in their run-up to Guts' Rage, their last few titles including this game, the Silver Case, and their greatest contribution to gaming, RPG Maker. Eidos, on the other hand, had a few fingerprints on the Dreamcast as a platform with the port of Omicron and Power Stone, but that doesn't give me an answer. At best, I can figure that Sega's hold on the industry was partly to blame here. Sega had lost so many third parties to Sony that it really was a scramble to get people onto the Dreamcast. Take who will get mentality, as the Dreamcast died not too long after Guts' Rage. Both my other Dreamcast reviews cover this, so check out Illbleed and Sonic Adventure for more. Secondly, Guts' Rage uses music from Berserk 97. Nothing to fully extrapolate on, just another little wrinkle that makes this an odder choice to release here. Thirdly, and the biggest one, despite this game retrofitting in between volumes 22 and 23 of Berserk, the current books for the manga at the time of the game's release were volumes 17 and 18. Dab smack in the middle of the Conviction arc. This will make a title drop later confusing, as either this story was retrofitted like I said, and Mira gave Ukes and the publishers a look ahead at future storylines for Berserk, meaning the lack of documentation glares harder. I don't doubt the validity of option B. It would make sense for Mira, as closely as he worked with Ukes on the game as it seems, to give a preview of where Berserk was going, but for no one to have spoken out about it or made reference to it? Really? Guess reality is as strange as fiction. Anywho, a lot to the Dreamcast, I went with Redream as my steadfast ally, though ROM searching was a bit chaotic, as Vim's lair is nothing more than a shallow grave now. Our story begins with a trio of characters, none of which are the main cast. Rita, her father, and Job the Strongman, a traveling band of carnies whose wagon has broken down, not in backcountry, but it would still cause Duke to complain. Robber country. Rapist country, more like it, as the bandits get all creepy-like towards Rita, and when Casca materializes out of nowhere towards her as well. But walking in from the right side of the stage is Guts. Gatsu. Yeah, this is the old translation, but I'll stick to his real name. Guts splatters the brigands before trying to abscond from the scene, getting talked into following Rita and her group by Puck, as Guts and Casca are low on supplies. Though Rita, her father, and Job have gone on ahead, Guts notes that there is something off with the muscle as he and Casca follow in the carnie's footsteps, the brand bleeding a signifier that he ain't human.
But even you need to take a break once in a while. All work and no play will make you a grump. Come on, come on, come on. I wanna go. We both wanna go. Please, please, please. Oh, please, come on, let us go. Let's live a little. Come on, Gatsu. Please.
Sure, whatever. We need to get food anyway. I'm starving.
Yeah! Hear that, Casca? Yippee! He said we're going.
I only got a glance, but I'm sure that guy in the wagon.
Quick enough to make it into town to see the ending routine of the carnival act, Guts' observation proves right, as a gross parasite is revealed to be puppeting Job. Or seemingly so, Job acting up in violent self-defense, only when the townsfolk pelted him with mean words and garbage. A mandragora is what the creature is, or was, since this is the Black Swordsman we're talking about, a growing problem in this part of Midland, as Guts saw some of the flowers growing about in his walk into town. Rita takes umbrage with Guts' dispatch of Job, but I don't know. Job wasn't about to stop anytime soon with the murdering and killing, so she might be this side of wrong. As if aware that a mandragora was slain in the streets, the hamlet's ruler, Baron Balzac, get your dick jokes out of the way now, asks for Guts' audience in regards to solving the plant problem. In exchange, Balzac offers a cure for Casca, which, well, I've heard that one before. At least Balzac is upfront in his villainy, ordering his second-in-command to proceed with the plan, which for right now entails ordering knights to descend upon Rita, leaving Casca under Puck's care so he can follow Balzac. Guts gets a private tour of the Baron's secret underground Mandragoran lab. It's no drain lab, so that's a positive, but a medieval torture dungeon is hardly a massive step up. Brand bleed sucks, don't you know? Finished with the tour, Balzac recounts the history of the Mandragora spread and infection, detailing that those that can overcome the death rattle of the plant when it is plucked, mandrakes and mandragora are the same thing by a different name, or the parasitization wind up with a forever cure. Unfortunately, neither option has an answer. Mandragora die when they are pulled from the ground, making a serum impossible to craft, and no one has found harmony when infected, becoming a ticking time bomb like Job. A Mandragora heart is what is necessary, but that requires a long-lived tree to have sprouted. Thankfully, in Balzac's account, he mentions a Mandragoran village he attacked in the past to stifle the disease. While he wasn't able to raze the town to the ground, he made off with a paltry sample of Mandragoran heart, confirming a tree has taken root.
Before I began searching for a cure, I tried attacking a village of Mandragorans. I wished to prevent further spread of the disease, you see. But the monsters fought back ferociously. I've never seen such carnage. I survived, and brought back some of the heart. But just a piece of a Mandragora heart. Sadly, it wasn't enough. To cure so many people, we need to find a larger heart.
Get to the point. What for me?
That village is on the edge of my land.
Looks like Guts has earned himself a one-way trip to this village, if under dubious means. A chord struck, we get further confirmation that Balzac is not to be trusted when Casca bumbles into a pair of knights attempting to execute Rita in the foyer of the Baron's castle, a riot of peasants rushing the premises, putting a kibosh on that. With a target given to him, a nun that lives in the village expressing that this story takes place after conviction, as our swordsman posits that he doesn't get along with holy people, Guts has to battle his way out of the Baron's seat of power with the rebellion happening. Lost somewhere in the middle of it is Casca, Puck and Rita's dog, directing Guts to the rebels' base, the leader Duntef having hidden the other brand bearer away from the carnage. See, while Guts was racing through the streets to find Casca, Balzac's second in command pulled a jape and ordered his bodyguards to kill the Black Swordsman in the chaos. Turns out, as Duntef explains, Balzac is building up an army of Mandragoran soldiers to potentially spread his sphere of influence. However, Balzac wasn't always a tyrant, instead at one point of his life being a fair ruler for the hardened folk of this border town. Of course, with as much bloodshed as this place has seen, a gaggle of ghouls and ghosts arise to kill Guts, but he effortlessly buries them en route to his reunion with Casca. With his companions safe, Guts explains to Duntef the situation he's been put into, and what Balzac can possibly do with the Mandragoran heart. While doubting the Baron's claims of a cure-all, Duntef's child bears a Mandragoran parasite. Balzac's done the scientific legwork, so sure, Duntef agrees to join Guts on the trek towards the blighted hovel, after receiving an earful from Rita.
You have no proof he's telling the truth.
Duntef! If it is true, we might be able to save our boy. We need Balzac's research if we are going to bring him back to us, just as he says. Even if he is a devil, we need him.
That may well be true, but I just can't accept it. Damn it! How can we rely on one who oppresses us?
To let your fates be decided by all this talk of ancestors' blood. To let the past tie you down. The present belongs to the living, not the dead. Are you going to trade this child's future for the past?
Life belongs to the living, and fate isn't determined, all that stuff. Group split off again, Puck and Rita with Casca to watch over her in the fountain, and Guts with Duntef and his mercs for a Mandragoran heart. Everything just immediately shits the bed. Balzac's army kidnaps the trio left behind, while Guts has to keep at bay a tide of plant-based hybrids, chimeras you could say, on the hike towards the village. Further spiraling, when the men get to their destination, Guts' brand acts up, stopping him from preventing a member of the group from yanking a mandragora out of the ground. Attack bell ringing, the affected villagers swarm the sole survivor Guts, who fights for a time until that aforementioned nun sequesters the rampaging berserker and mandragora. Ariza, as she's called, the nun tries to dissuade Guts from his goal, but a wounded Rita, somehow avoiding the forest of death, plays messenger. Either Guts gets the heart or Balzac will kill Casca. Throwing a Hail Mary, Ariza weaves the tale of Nico, a young boy of bright disposition, relying on the crops of the village he lived in, and teased endlessly for his oddness. He never hurt anyone, but one bad winter and bam! The boy dies with his dog, his sole companion at the end, and a baylet unused.
There used to be a boy named Nico in this village. He was simple-minded, and he sometimes disturbed the crops. But he was a good boy at heart, gentle. He would never hurt another person. Even when the villagers teased him, threw stones at him, or beat him with sticks, Nico was just happy for the gift of life. He marveled at a sunny sky, and no matter what his misfortune, he was always smiling. But one winter day, Nico was on the brink of death from hunger. The crops had failed that year. Not a single person would give him any food. With the last of his strength, Nico managed to crawl to the church. But I didn't even notice him. The sound of the door opening was drowned out by the New Year's bell. When I found him, he was... He never did a thing wrong. He was just a little different from the others. Why was he treated so cruelly, so callously? Why did Nico have to die?
What does this have to do with anything? Well, the Mandragora won't attack unless aggravated first, merely minding their own business until you start trouble with them. But they end it permanently through death, offering no recompense, and collateral isn't a word to the creatures, so two wrongs don't make a right, especially when they consider everything a threat. Playing her hand, Ariza confirms her status as an apostle through implication, renouncing human emotion as the downfall of mankind, while praising the hive mind of the Mandragora as the true way that humans should live. A paradise of law, but I, Guts, and most neutral and chaos-aligned protagonists of SMT reject Ariza's thinking. The Mandragora aren't human because they've rejected all the tenets of being human. The bad, but also the good. They're automatons. Realizing that she's trying to convince a mountain to move, Ariza falls back to the church as Guts prepares for a possible showdown. Meanwhile, Puck tries his damnedest to rescue Casca, but standing the size of an action figure, he can't do a lot. In a bizarre twist of fate, however, flying around this neck of the woods is the immortal Zod, who inadvertently frees Casca as he wants a rematch against Guts.
Oh no! Yikes! Arrgh, don't touch her! Get away! Stop! Oh! Oh no, something very bad.
magic nearby. You're that branded swordsman's woman. Then he must be nearby.
Funnily enough, the two already had an encounter at the Hill of Swords not a few days ago, so I guess Zod still has the adrenaline pumping in his veins. Off he goes to the village. Cell open, Casca does as she does, wandering throughout Balzac's castle, stopping at a royal chamber that houses a woman suffering from the same mental disconnect the former Band of the Hawk member has. Puck determines this unnamed person as Balzac's daughter, a portrait in the room context-cluing that daughter looks exactly like mother, but seeing as what series we're in, yeah, that's his wife. And not in the incest way, but as an oh. Balzac knows the same pain Guts is in way. Like usual, Casca's absent-mindedness gets her into trouble, bumbling into a mandragoran heart Balzac has kept hidden away, and accidentally awakening it. Interlude over, Guts, ordering Rita to stay back, chases after Ariza, and surprise, surprise, not only is she an apostle, but Nico has been subsumed into the root of the mandragoran tree and became an apostle as well. Weed whacking as best he can, Guts rips Nico's body free from the base, but before he can pocket the heart, Ariza, still alive, flees the scene with the boy's torso in tow. Right into the rubble of Balzac's handiwork. Cornered, Ariza opts for death by excruciating heat, rushing back into the burning church so that no one can steal Nico's heart. One little matter though. A necklace is dropped before the two hit the fire. A necklace bearing a Baylet. Not Crimson, as 216 years haven't passed yet since Femto's birth, but a Baylet nonetheless. Rita doesn't know this, and I don't think Guts notices the cursed object, too busy with Balzac's army. While the second-in-command rambles the typical bad guy speech, Zod dynamically enters to scare them off. Clashing for the third time, Zod and Guts fight to a standstill, neither party having the time to spare for a duel. Zod because Griffith needs him for the Kushan invasion happening in the other parts of Midland, Guts because Casca needs to be rescued. At least the infected townsfolk of this village are free of the Mandragora with the death of the original heart. A return trip to the castle has Guts lead a one-man war against the remaining Mandragora under the second heart in Balzac's army, its final stop being Balzac's chambers. The once great ruler sheds his facade to the Black Swordsman party of Guts, Rita, and Puck. The burdens of the world weighing down so hard on kindly Balzac till he found naught but joy in the spilling of blood, a taste in of itself that has rusted with time. Balzac's research did cure his wife, but left her a child in a human body, a person with no ambitions, a shell without a soul.
I feared nothing. I thought I could go on bearing every burden. But little by little, like snow piling up on top of me, I was engulfed in burden.
Piled up?
Oh, cruel time.
Time?
You're young. You don't understand the strain. Unending battles. A turbulent land. Impoverished subjects. A wife who will never recover. It all just got heavier and heavier. Sorrow without end. Expectation turned to frustration. Love turned to obligation. Everything I valued was blanketed by fatigue.
But this is the path of remembrance Balzac has chosen to walk, sunken cost be damned. Ingesting a Mandragora concoction, the ruler does battle with Guts, but ultimately loses, allowing the swordsmen Rita and Puck to look for Casca, and the unstable, overgrown heart. However, unbeknownst to Rita, she accidentally drops the Bailet, a problem that comes into focus after Guts slays the fully grown second heart and reunites with a slightly mentis compos Casca. Offering his wife as the sacrifice, Balzac summons the PNG-stricken God Hand to ascend as an apostle. I made a Chimera joke earlier, but this is the real one.
Jeez.
No matter, this isn't Guts' first rodeo with an apostle, and Balzac is seemingly one of the weaker ones. Butchering the ruler a second time, the Mandragoran crisis is, well, contained, but the townsfolk are still as human as we all are. As Elfheim awaits, Guts, Puck, and Casca part with Rita, our story ending with the Skull Knight ensuring that Nico's Bailet is never used again. Of all the things to make a Type B adaptation of, that being a filler story that connects arcs together, why was Guts' Rage even created? Fundamentally speaking at the time, the only exposure a Western audience would have had to Berserk would have been in small doses. The manga, hell, even the 97 anime, wasn't household back then like how I said at the start. You'd have been deep in the bush or know nothing at all. This is tape trading territory, running VHS in your garage so you can properly line up fan subs, physically translating volumes of manga, passing by word of mouth, or learning Japanese. So for Guts' Rage to assume the role it has been given leaves way too many holes as there aren't plugs to fill them. Why the first 3 volumes of Berserk work is because you get a smattering of ideas within the Black Swordsman arc that get massively elaborated on come Golden Age. It's an in media res that Miura works well to pay off, so having incomplete knowledge at the start is a feature, not bug. Guts' Rage frames itself around that concept as you're kinda dumped into the middle of Guts and Casca's wandering, but then never gives any payoff or explains what the bloody hell is going on. Who is Guts? Why is he Brandon? And what is wrong with Casca? What's their relationship? Dare say, what happened? These questions lead into the Golden Age arc when tackling the manga, but here they float around like the specters that casually harass our branded duo. Our duo who are quite lifeless and given little to do except prance around the stage acting out this newsworthy passion play. There is little inner turmoil, self-betterment, or philosophical pondering in Guts' Rage, core tenets of Berserk's sweeping narrative. While blood and gore are awash in the pages, at the tip of that sword are unforgettable things and people. My favorite aspect of Berserk is Guts' character growth. How he goes from a loner angry at the world and obsessed with revenge to learning how to let people in and recover from trauma. None of that is here. About the only payoff, if you want to call it that, is that Balzac is in a similar situation to Guts, but all I can extrapolate from that is, well, yeah, Guts is walking a fine line between man and monster. A point already made within the manga, so it's not even a unique framework to hang filler off of. The Beast of Darkness would say hello if the Black Swordsman arc didn't already show how kinda shitty Guts was as a person during that time period. Speaking of Balzac, he's fine. He and the nun actually have a bit of that Berserk magic in them, as both are regular people driven mad by loss and suffering. They're the exact opposite of Wild in that instead of embracing how shitty the world is and becoming a monster, Balzac and Ryza try to inspire those around them only to have their hopes and dreams crushed twisting them into caricatures of who they once were. Back to the main point, assumption is the key word for the day, as instead of going out of its way to bring you up to speed or give some reasoning, Guts' Rage loves layering on things that don't matter to the layman, and leaves fans like me conflicted. A big deal is made for Zod as he breaks into the prison that Casca's being held in, and clearly there's some form of rivalry between the demon and Guts, but like, who the fuck is Zod to the average Joe renting this when it came out? I know who he is because I've read and watched Berserk, but if this was your first introduction to the series playing it on the Dreamcast, that question never gets answered. Not to nerd out, but Zod doesn't show up at all during Black Swordsman, appearing as his human form first during Golden Age, before transforming and getting his horn cut off. So it's even more confusing that Guts' Rage decides to include Zod. It feels like fan service, but for who? Retroactively, I can point at the screen and kneel before Zod, but casting your mind back to release, who was Zod's inclusion for? Doubly so as there isn't a flashback to give insight to Rose Z. It could have easily been any other no-name apostle, and nothing would have changed except removing any reasonable questions from the audience, wondering why the big flying lion demon is important. Like, the Griffith name drop lacks any impact its utterance has because we never see the guy, and Guts' reaction is muted compared to his usual, and Skull Knight could have easily been mistaken as a villain with his cameo during the post-credits when he's been in Guts' corner since day one. That's the conflicted angle I'm coming from. I feel as if I'm having to play catch-up to explain what is going on to someone who might not know a lick about Berserk. More so than usual. As with tie-ins, you already kinda have to do that, but compare this to Fate Extra. The PSP entry still went out of its way to go over topics and lore important to the mythos, while giving a bit of leeway with its cameos if it was your beginning point for Fate. And all we had to go off of back then in 2010 was the Studio Dean adaptation of FSN, and if you were deep in the know, a fan translation of the visual novel. This is comparable to the state Guts' Rage found itself in, so it's insane how one game tries its best to inform the player, while the other doesn't even bother. Metaphorically, it's 2000, and I'm the friend who can read Japanese and has read Berserk up to current, while you're someone who knows nothing about it but saw that I have a Dreamcast with a game that has a cool-looking sword guy on the cover and wanted to try it out. That's the only way you'd be smartened up. But all of what I've said above is from an American mindset back when the game was released. Japan's? Oh yeah, this takes place between volumes 22 and 23 during the beginning of the Millennium Falcon arc. Guts' Rage? Nope. Berserk Millennium Falcon arc, chapter of the Flowers of Oblivion. Griffith? Yeah, he just reincarnated and he and Zod had their encounter with Guts on the Hill of Swords. This isn't Black Swordsman Guts, but a post-conviction Guts, gathering what would be the start of his new band with Farnese, Serpico, Isidro, Shirky, and Ivalra. This is the arc that the following PlayStation 2 game would cover as a Type A adaptation, that is, a retelling of the plot with some minor deviations to fill gameplay, ending with Guts' inaugural activation of the Berserker armor against Grunbeld. How fucking disjointed is that? As the first piece of Berserk media properly released in America, it can't work as an introduction to the series because what leads into this game wasn't released over here until much later, and Guts' Rage, nay, Flowers of Oblivion, assumes you're caught up. Unless you had a friend like the one I propped myself up as in my metaphor, or you were that friend, you'd be lost. Every question an American would have is answered if you were Japanese, leaving the Balzac kerfuffle this singular point of interest to criticize as a retread of the Black Beast background element haunting Guts. That means, yes, this is a standard Type B adaptation, but one lost in translation. I know I'm 2 decades late on that observation as Berserk has gotten released over here, and with the ballooning of the internet, fan translations and official scanlations have increased in accuracy, so the game not explaining who or what has been mitigated in its entirety, but that was the historical context in 2000, and Guts' Rage is such a time capsule of the Wild West of anime becoming a hit in America. Worlds apart where anything even slightly anime adjacent was given the green light to be translated. I feel like the better version of this, besides my Fate Extra comparison, is Vampire Hunter D Bloodlust, as even though the movie is based on the 3rd book, which wasn't published in an official capacity in America until post-2005, it still works as that jumping in point where both sides can actually get something out of it, unlike how Guts' Rage really only works as Flowers of Oblivion. Again, why was this even published over here? As if this was a case of Millennium Falcon PlayStation 2, I wouldn't feel obligated to needle the bits that I have because the assumption made by the PlayStation 2 title is right. Only a fan would truly get something out of Millennium Falcon. But that's not what Guts' Rage goes for, leaving it this bizarre pseudo-introduction to Berserk for America, while Japan, it's merely a continuation of an arc. And, well, looking at it from that angle, Flowers of Oblivion is so bog standard of a Type B adaptation that there isn't much to say. If you're a fan of Berserk, you might get something out of this, but I guess I've been spoiled by other adaptations or spin-offs of series I enjoy. I brought up Fate Extra for a reason, as I love Extella as well, that seeing Guts, Casca, and parts of the recurring cast didn't do anything for me. One aspect that isn't half and half in Guts' Rage is its presentation. This is definitely a premier example of what the Dreamcast could do with character modeling and animation, as damn does the game capture Guts' style of fighting quite well, at least looks and sound-wise. There's a sense of weight captured whenever Guts starts swinging, but even though the Dragon Slayer is the heavy slab of metal that it is, Guts doesn't struggle with the monstrosity. The sheer speed of which he unleashes his rage captures the paradoxical nature of Guts' fighting style. On one hand, you feel the tons behind Dragon Slayer. It's like the air collapses around every slash, creating that wonderful noise that accompanies any attack Guts does. On the other hand, it's a toy in the Black Swordsman's hands in the best way. It doesn't take Guts any effort to whip it around and bifurcate any sad sap that thinks it can take the branded one. Seamless and fluid is how Guts looks when doing his business, but there's still a tinge of having to compensate for a mighty weapon. Some of the attacks Guts is able to perform clearly get away from him, as if he's putting his whole arse into a double-edged move. Sometimes you have to take those risky options when fighting horrors beyond the pale. But what's more, Guts has his whole bag of tricks to cycle through, and even has a few unarmed combinations to show off. My favorite detail in all of Guts' animations is when he does decide to unload with his repeating crossbow, mostly because you see him have to hand crank it to unleash a barrage, and when he's finished, Guts packs a bundle of arrows into the tool to keep it topped up. Not to leave the cannon out of this conversation, there is a bit of a delay when it's fired as if to capture Guts having to unfurl the contraption from his metal hand. And we haven't even gotten to the enemy front. Stealing the show absolutely are the bosses, in particular Zod and Balzac. As aggravating it is to be grabbed by them on repeat, they're intricate in their flashiness. You could probably do a breakdown on Zod alone, the Immortal having unique reactions when staggered or attacked while blocking. All the littler monsters and ruffians aren't too bad either, as I'll never not find the frogs weirdly funny in their posturing, but it do be the big thing sometimes. It's all good stuff though, made better by the fact that the quality of the animation isn't just limited to the gameplay. For my dislike of QTEs, they do display the evolution of where the 3D era started and where it would be going. Look at the likes of the classic Resident Evil games, 1 through 3, where we had blocky character models with pre-rendered backgrounds, to Silent Hill, which had a fully 3D world with blocky models, to this and Shenmue, where we have completely articulated characters in a modeled world. If this was a showcase for what the Dreamcast could do with 3D models, the last Sega console definitely ushered in the new era alongside the PlayStation 2. It's what makes the opening walk into town one of my favorite cutscenes, as it highlights the grander scale the console could aim for and delivers. My only criticism, and it is an unfair judgment, thus don't take this as all-encompassing or a deal-breaker, on the visual front is that Sword of the Berserk is limited by hardware in comparison to the source. This is aimed towards the Mandragora designs, which are this side of gross fleshy parasite monster, which I do love as a concept, but we know Mura would have gone all out. I will add, I don't have anything to say regarding the music of Guts' Rage solely due to the fact that it uses a close approximation of the Berserk 97 OST, right down to a few vocal tracks straight from the anime. Self-evident in the best way. Berserk 97 to a good number of people is the premier soundtrack to the franchise. Susumu Hirasawa, you've done it again! Continuing with these easily observable aspects, man do I love the sound design of the game. Different from the mixing, we are in the golden era of poor audio levelation. There's a chunkiness to whenever Guts gets roaring with the Dragon Slayer. Controversial opinion, or bordering on one, I honestly do believe that Berserk 2016 had the right idea, or had an idea in the right ballpark when it came to trying to convey the sounds of Guts' fighting. I'm not saying that the end product was good at all. CLANG has been a meme for a reason. What I'm getting at is to properly capture the impact and weight of Dragon Slayer and Guts slinging it around, you need a solid backing of animation and sound. I've already covered the former, so with the latter, Dragon Slayer wouldn't be like a traditional sword slicing through the air. Something like a katana, a short sword, hell, even a cutlass or saber would have a whoosh noise. You know, that general sword-swinging noise I and about tens of thousands others have used. Maybe with a bloody attached to it to get it pumping. The usual. Something the size of Dragon Slayer wouldn't have a light, airy chop. It'd be closer to the likes of a semi rolling past you at a top speed of around 45 miles per hour. The air isn't so much being cut through as savagely sundered upon the blade. And you hear the follow through of that whenever Guts so much as clips a hazard. In my oblique way of painting an image of light and sound, for as on point as the animation is, the sound and Foley work is the second punch to the first. Regardless of everything else I might have said before or what I will say afterward, remember this. Sword of the Berserk Guts' Rage understands all the intricacies that goes into the Black Swordsman's fighting style, from how his moves should look to how it should sound. And to a lesser extent, the returning cast as well, seeing as we get the old Puck and Casca routine complete with Chibi Puck. Where the crack lies in the presentation is the voice work, and I more chalk this up to early installment dubbing weirdness than anything else. It's an all-star cast. Michael Bell, voice of Gleeman Vox, The Fear, and Captain Grimalkin, drives the team forward as Guts, while Cam Clark, Liquid Snake, Andre Almeida, and BJ Ward, Velma during the 90s resurgence of Scooby-Doo, join as Puck and Casca respectively, while Earl Bowen, LeChuck, Paula Tiso, Sylvia Crystal, and Laughing Octopus's VO, and Paul Eiding, the Colonel himself, real Metal Gear reunion going on, hang around as Rita, Balzac, and Duntef, but I think the problem is the direction. Everyone seems just kinda there. Not bad, not great, pretty average. It also may just be that I don't find the English version of Flowers compelling, as everyone is practically saddled with a one note.
Casca! Are you alright, my love? Thanks for your help. Where will you go now? I made Balzac a promise. I'm going to Mandragora Village to get the heart of a great tree. What? Didn't I just tell you he is a ruthless tyrant? So why? I need him. That bug knows something. If he has a drug that can cure her, I need to take the chance. A cure? In his castle. He runs a lab to create a cure. I need the drug that he's making. But you have no proof he's telling the truth.
Like, Cam Clark doesn't really provide any unique energy or take to Puck, so all I'm left with is generic comedy relief, which is part of the elf's character, but Cam doesn't elevate the role or make it his own. Watchers of the show know that Cam can own a role. He makes the character of Almeida come to life. This leaves me hazarding the guess I made earlier, that this was a production/direction side problem. I think the worst to get out of this is Michael and Paul, because all I hear is Gleeman Vox and the Colonel coming out of both. The Steve Bloom dilemma. It is the one, admittedly tiny, blemish on an otherwise pretty stacked presentation. Dreamcast games hit different. Sword of the Berserk Guts' Rage is a 3D action brawler akin to your bouncers. Sorry.
The Bouncer!
Thank you, Nomura. On the difficulty side of things, there is a selectable option in the options menu, giving you the choices of easy, normal, and hard. While defaulting to normal when booting up, on the scale of games I've played for this channel, this leans more towards, funnily enough, Lilo and Stitch rather than, say, a Bloodborne or Max Payne. Warning flags should already be raised and assumptions made on my behalf on what happened during recording, but I'll save that statement for the overall. Clever wordplay indeed. While there are some optional modes to dick around with in Guts' Rage, particularly a few minigames and a survival mode, I'll keep to the main story as that is what I expect most people to do. And not because I just didn't find those modes interesting enough to investigate. Picking story drops you right into the middle of the plot where the level structure becomes known. Each level, or chapter if you want to call them, is made up of sub-scenes of gameplay, usually split up by cutscenes. So, from the offset, Chapter 1 begins with the opening cinematic, then you have a round of gameplay swatting away bandits until it's back to a cutscene, rinse repeat until chapter clear. No, like, Guts' Rage flashes in bright red font when you've beaten a chapter. Exact breakdown goes as follows for Chapter 1. Cutscene, Subscene 1 with bandits, Cutscene, Subscene 2 with boss, Cutscene, Subscene 3 with Mandragora, Cutscene, Subscene 4 with knights, Cutscene, Subscene 5 with monsters, Cutscene, in chapter. Not all chapters share this same length, however, as it's either chapter 4 or 5 that encapsulates the Zod fight, making it the whole block. Basically, cutscene, Zod, cutscene, in chapter. Or of course, there is a bit of intricacy when it comes to how the parts you play through are laid out, so let's step away from structure for a bit to cover the basics in Berserking. Bust out a Dreamcast control scheme for any controller you might have, as we are dealing with that button layout. My preference being a current Xbox controller, as it's the Swiss Army knife of the gaming world. Back to the beginning, you are dumped right into an encounter with a sizable party of brigands, so you'll have to learn fast. A is one of your attack buttons, with mashing it breaking out Guts' standard combo. It's pretty lengthy string-wise, but that is where the B button comes into frame. As an alternative to A, B string is a whole 2 attacks, but it hits wider and can be used better for crowd control compared to mashing A. That said, the real strength of B is its role as an ender in A strings. During any part of an A combo, you can hit B to go into an ender with differing properties. For example, A into B does a set of vertical chops, while AAB leads into a wide sweep for groups. I can't go into every variation and what they're used for, mostly because the main A string is like 8 hits in total, so experiment and see what works in any given situation. Typically, anything that leads into a hard knockdown is good, as enemies are helpless on the ground and primed for more damage. Holding down A or B for a little bit charges up Guts' Get Off Me attack, but it's liable to get you killed because the charging period is too long in the tooth for a move that should be a button press. Streets of Rage or Final Fight, this ain't. I've read that there is one by hitting A and B together. Spoiler alert, you aren't told what Guts can do and instead have to learn on the fly or by looking up on game facts. Yippee! But each time I tried, nothing happened. So either it's particular or it doesn't exist. Compared to A and B, X and Y don't have much going on for them as defensive options. X jumps, and while I think it has a bit of invuln frames on startup, a la jump canceling in Devil May Cry, jumping serves a singular purpose: access to the 2-step jump attack. A chop going up, and a chop coming down. It knocks down most threats, so it is useful. Y, on the flip side, is a dodge and block based on if you are moving or not. Stationary, a one-sided block that protects against most attacks. One-sided in that any enemy can slip behind you for damage, and most as in you can't block certain unblockables or grabs. You're better off dodging, as since there's no lock-on, free-eyeing a guard usually leads to disaster, and with the swarms you go up against, someone will inevitably slip around for a hit. Dodging comes in two flavors, a slide and defensive hop. When holding a block, moving the stick causes Guts to hop, which does have some prevalence when going up against bosses, generally because you can keep the threat in your sights. Meanwhile, while moving when you hit Y, Guts will slide, which functions both as a dodge and as an attack. Again, it occupies the same weird space the jump does. It feels like it carries a minimum amount of iframes, making it a blundering option. Essentially, you either physically dodge a move or you get bopped. However, the slide is useful for disrupting small to medium-sized foes as it flips them up into the air and onto the ground. It deals a minimum amount of damage, but can get you out of a jam. While Guts' main method of dealing with creatures and the errant human is the Dragon Slayer, the girth of the hunk can lead you to soulsing into walls. Mildly annoying in the Miyazaki setting up to Berserk, here in Guts' Rage, bonking your sword on a wall can be a real hazard to your health. So, as an alternative, Guts can sheath the Dragon Slayer by pressing L1, granting him access to hand-to-hand. Pitiful in its output, about the only reasons to put up Dragon Slayer is to do the unsheathing swipe by moving and hitting L1, or to use Guts' repeating crossbow, which swaps out his B moveset. At least the final punch to the 3-hit combo is a hard knockdown. Better off feeling out the collision than dealing with less damage. Rounding out the main man's moveset, Guts has 4 items at his disposal, and he has Rage Mode. The HUD is minimal in that the 3 aspects to keep track of are health in the top left, Rage, which is below health, and items are in the top right. In an offbeat style of cohesion, Guts' Rage and Lilo and Stitch GBA do share an arcade root. As opposed to a standard game over screen when you die with continue or quit, you have a 10 count and credits. 0 marks a game over, but hitting start as long as you have a credit respawns you at the beginning of a section. Typically, when you have a screen change or after a cutscene is the start of a new section, so dying isn't all that bad, especially because it restocks Guts' items. Used by holding down R1 and pressing a face button, you have throwing knives, bombs, the cannon, and fairy dust assigned to A, B, Y, and X. Knives are unlimited and deal fairly little damage, but stagger well enough and are one of Guts' only reliable ranged options. Stock 3, bombs explode after a little delay, interrupting whoever in their vicinity and dealing moderate damage. Iconic as it is limited and powerful, the portable hand cannon has 2 shots loaded in the barrel and turns all but the toughest of mobs and bosses into meaty paste. Aim it carefully lest you kick yourself for stupidity. Also coming in a pair, Fairy Dust is Guts' only means of healing outside of reaching the end of a subscene. It is a full heal at least. Items are restocked at irregular intervals and can be found in breakables in levels, but the times I counted as being up Shit's Creek without dust or cannon shots was a tad too high for my liking. Completing Guts' moveset upon taking or dealing enough damage to fill the bar below health, Guts enters Rage. Increased power, semi-invulnerability, as while you still suffer hit stun, only the Rage meter drains, and immunity to wall collision. Rage may not start a conflict, but it damn well ends one for the most part. A few move properties get swapped as well, yet that doesn't really matter when you butcher anything in around 2 to 3 hits. Back to level structure, it is linear for the most part. You're practically funneled into encounter after next, a la your standard beat-em-up affair, though there are a few curveballs thrown at QTE speed. QTEs. Shenmue doesn't get fully blamed for an awful mid-2000s trend. Some kill you instantly, others change the route you take in a level. Which ones are which? You know, all the secrets of the universe haven't been discovered yet, so maybe you'll take that leap to find out. Screw replayability, ain't trying to die. Segue, enemies and bosses stalk stages and make up the bulk of character interaction. For the most part, bosses highlight the end of chapters, but this isn't always the case. Rule of thumb, bosses tend to have at least one unblockable, and I found more success relying on aggression or avoidance than trying to stand in guard. Rage can and tends to be the tide turner when it pops, if you catch my drift. Other than that, bosses have a small pool of moves they shift between, and it does feel like a damage race against them sometimes. Enemies come in a few varieties, though there are two major groups to contend with. Humans and Mandragora. Mandragoran monsters maul you maliciously, i.e. outside of growing bigger and getting more health, Mandragora are melee threats only. Outside the frogs and their annoying size, you'll know which Mandragoras are higher up on the totem pole. Humans, meanwhile, can be ranged bastards as well. They can be a bit all over the place, as you have brigands, some with throwing axes as a side option, others not, assassins and their rapiers and throwing knives, and knights of differing rank and armor. They all go down the same and don't require much thinking to obliterate. Just be mindful of anyone with a ranged weapon, as they tend to hang back and stagger you mid-combo. Oh, and the numbers. Enemies tend to clump. To finish the tab, quitting out of the game, I think, brings you back to the start of a subscene when you go to load. So, for example, if you quit out during the hallway fight at the end of the game before Balzac 1, you pick up there instead of the beginning of the chapter, and Guts' rage silently saves, so I can't tell when it does it exactly, but don't quote me on that. I don't know what it is, but I like to think that the developers knew how bullshit Guts' rage could be and thus invested into a pretty forgiving continue system. While credit-based, there isn't too much of a major penalty when you get a game over. Sure, whatever segment you were in gets restarted, so with the hallway example you have to redo the fight from the beginning, which sucks, but the positives far outweigh the negatives. All your items get restocked. That means if you've had a grueling time with the past few subscenes, as the war in Balzac's Hamlet is a gauntlet of sterner stuff ranging from the armored knights and their Mandragoran counterparts, with the additional bombardment of bolts and throwing weapons, taking a strategic death doesn't set you back. That means, as I said back in Lilo and Stitch, the only real brick wall in your path is your ability to care when slop is being piled on your plate. And unlike the other arcade-inspired title, Guts' rage taking this route is pretty forward-thinking for the time of the turn of the millennium. If I may do a callback or two to some previous episodes on the show, Michael Bay's Transformers and Max Payne 1 on console were stingy with how they handled their checkpointing and respawning. Michael Bay had you restart entire missions on a cock-up, sometimes a minor one setting you back a good while Max Payne 1 on console forewent quick-saving for predetermined checkpoints that could effectively lock you out if you played poorly. Even a good run could slam you back to the beginning of a terrible level segment if you slightly messed up. And believe you me, relying entirely on checkpoints without quick saving to get through the Asir building was about as fun as whittling down the grind caking the hallways of this place. It's funny how a game right at the start of the 6th generation of consoles fundamentally understood how checkpointing and getting you right back into the action should work, yet you can pull example after next from 6 and 7 gens for awful roadblocks on that design front. There are those of you out there that don't remember a time where you had to sit through a 12-minute long cutscene to get back into a late-game boss fight, and I envy you. Truly the best way to play Kingdom Hearts 1 is Final Mix, if at all. Because if you died during the final Dark Riku fight, or Dragon Maleficent as I find that battle even harder, congratulations, your reward is rewatching a cutscene you've already seen because skipping wasn't invented yet. I also recall Dead Space 3's weird-ass autosaving in which the game would essentially suspend progress when engaging in a side quest, so you either completed it in one go, or when you quit out, you'd be at the area before the content started. Sword of the Berserk? Yeah, you can skip any cutscene unless it has a QTE involved. That's a relatively common sense kind of thought process, yet it wasn't standardized until later in 6 and 7, something I can give Sword of the Berserk a gold star for as a smart decision. The last thing I really want to be doing in video games is busy work or falling down the path of insanity before getting back to what I came for, actually playing the game. I think that exposes the underlying issue of Guts' rage, mind you. Theoretically, I should like the concepts introduced in the game. Guts is here in all his glory, having 2 selectable movesets with his bag of tricks on standby. It technically stays true to the blueprint, and the result should be a home run. You get a bit of that Berserk focus on story intermeshed with action and horror. It's as much playing out the fantasy of the Black Swordsman as it is following an intriguing story with character twists and turns. Or it should have been. Frickin' Zod is here, but the boss fight is hollow because of the restraints put on Sword of the Berserk both on the gameplay and story front. I feel trapped like I did during Lilo and Stitch GBA's good section, as the stuff I can, or should... There's that word again. Like, faintly obscure an underbelly of rot that I can sniff out. On paper, Sword of the Berserk Guts' Rage is a damn fine game because it plays to the strength of the property and gels well with the genre it picked. Outside of a traditional RPG, or maybe even a strategy RPG if Fire Emblem tickles your fancy, Berserk was meant to be with the action genre, whether beat 'em up, character, or Mozu. Guts easily fulfills the criteria of a Dante. As for as wide and sweeping Berserk is, it's the small moments that make up the portrait of Guts' character. Like how Dante's journeys are small scale and that we only hang around a few or so people, but we see the depth to each. I haven't covered Devil May Cry 3 yet, but that game is rich in detail when it comes to Dante and Virgil's relationship, how each view their role as successor to Sparta, and their own beliefs on strength, family, and love. To relate this back to Berserk, my favorite panel of all time is quite an early one. The sad Guts face. Happening right in the middle of the Black Swordsman arc, the Guts we know up until this point is a revenge-hungry beast. Yet below that surface is a man riddled with pain and suffering, human like the rest of us struggling to continue moving forward in an unjust world. Guts strives to protect the one he loves, but is so single-minded in that path that his obsession becomes personified as the Guile Black Beast, wishing to consume Casca so Guts can fully commit to killing Griffith. He carries this grief and anguish, but doesn't show it to anyone until finally learning to let people back into his life over the course of his interactions with the Swordsman Party, akin to how Dante in 3 realizes in his incursions with Lady, Arkham, and Virgil that true strength comes from fighting for a just cause, not for power's sake alone. All the pieces are in place. You have Mira handling the story, or the Japanese version, and the music is ripped out of the anime. How can this fail? Gotta love that a game that stars a character known for having a big fuck-off sword loves putting you in small as fuck corridors. Hey, remember Demon Souls or Dark Souls 1 where you were at risk of clanging your weapon on the walls if it was too big? Yeah, that's this on steroids. At least in Souls, you can afford to switch to a different weapon based on your build, and you don't have to go with two-handers if you don't want to. But because Guts' options are the Dragon Slayer or Fists, you're more fucked than everyone during the Eclipse. You either deal with the fact that you're gonna dance around walls as if in an awkward courting, or you switch to Fists and deal about as much damage as a guy punching supernatural horrors would do. At least that is somewhat fitting in with Berserk, as the whole reason why the Dragon Slayer can even do its business is because the thing's soaked in the blood of however many apostles and monsters, giving it bane qualities and making it Guts' only option to deal with the various nasties hounding after him. But that level of verisimilitude doesn't make up for the clang, clang, clanging. What is this, Berserk 2016? No matter what part of your combo, whatever attack you're performing, if you even think about getting near the walls, you'll bounce and be primed for a butt fucking. No matter when, no matter where, and it's not like foes will stand around with their thumbs up their asses. Enemies are highly aggressive even on normal, so you can't screw up, leading either to just cheesing with the jump attack as it has reliable stagger and doesn't suffer from collision, using items, or running away like a little bitch. That's exactly what I want to do in a licensed Berserk game. Avoid threats and cower in the corner hoping to avoid damage. Not like that's always viable, seeing as we're going off of beat-em-up rules half the time. Thank you, game, for locking me in a tight space where I can barely breathe, only to throw down a few dozen knights or mandragora with nary the courtesy to abide by the rules I get stricken down with. God hand help you if the roving bands of trash are armed with crossbows or throwing axes, as they can beam you from miles away, while your equivalents can either only be performed unarmed and has too much starting and ending lag to accentuate the low damage, or is only useful against singular targets which you rarely fight. Ranged opponents love running away, particularly towards walls, so they're your prime target, but good luck vaulting through the standing army between the crossbowmen and Guts. And the fixed camera has its own part to play, obfuscating these annoyances until you've been turned into a pincushion. Better yet, gotta love how sometimes enemies phase into the wall, leaving my choices down to throwing knives or the crossbow. Oh, what's that? You want more hot garbage on your plate? Guts is stiffer than the horse eyeing up Farnese. Obligatory rape horse reference aside, Guts is a full committal and taking a whole boat ride to change what he's doing from jumping to turning to attacking. Never thought I'd compare Guts to a kangaroo, but if anyone gets the drop on him, that's about a half to 3/4 of his life gone because he can't turn around with any speed. Same for going ham with the Dragon Slayer. You better hope that whatever you're swinging at is near you because Guts lacks any kind of directional control mid-combo, thus can't quickly snap to threats. And that's not even going into the exact hitbox of the Dragon Slayer or the speed of set attacks. You generally have between two types of swings: vertical chops and horizontal slices. Why this is a big issue is that Guts' combos typically begin with an overhead chop before going into a series of slices. For small frogs, the best part of any Guts' combos is the first Rekka, every other input missing, because swing 1 is a chop that can hit the damned amphibians, while swings 2 through 5 are slices that miss. There's no combination of overheads unless you do the jump attack, which is a fiddly bastard to land on the frogs and is subject to Guts' awful momentum retention and general poor movement, or A into B, which you're more than likely gonna be hit out of. Did I forget to mention that most threats barely give you room to breathe and Guts has the poise of a wet paper towel? Guts' best move to crowd clear is either a slow charge slice, which is the equivalent of etching the brand on yourself, or a 3-hit that ends with a wide sweep that thankfully does hit behind Guts, but is also subject to slowness. You always have to be on the offensive, leading to the other problem. Guts attacks somewhat fast for most of his moves outside the ones I brought up, but everyone else attacks at that same speed, if not faster. You are beyond liable to be hit out of your attack, which loops you into hit stun, and depending on enemy, death. The return back to the hamlet is solely difficult because you face a high number of knights that interrupt Guts on the drop of a dime, and you have no room to fight them in. The halberd-wielding Bazuzo wannabes have a Terry Funk helicopter move with lots of range and damage, plus stunning on hit that you can be stuck in with how small some of the corridors you fight them in are. The sub-boss before Balzac is an outright nightmare with the amount of enemies it wants you to slaughter while giving you no room to dodge or block. Yes, blocking exists in this game, but isn't omnidirectional, takes up Fortnite to start up so you can't even use it on reaction, because there's no way to tell what an enemy is going to do. That's the amount of emphasis their attack animations have, and with the amount of unblockables there are, you're better off sliding or jumping around to avoid potential damage instead of hoping that an enemy doesn't slip through. Zod and Mandragora and Balzac earn their dues as the toughest bosses because they attack erratically, sometimes with strings, other times with single strong hits. How will you know? Well, that's the fun part. You won't. By the time you scramble to block, you've already been driven 3 feet under. And if my Omni-Man quotable wasn't a tip-off, both have grabs that you can't block, Zod having 2 at long and short range, and Balzac's tell for his blending together with the rest of his moves. Trying to free block also doesn't work when most of what you're fighting bob and weave so often that you lose sight of them. You're better off going full offensive than half and half. And with this comes another core issue I have surrounding the title. Why do most regular enemies withstand Dragon Slayer? Dragon Slayer. The weapon too big and unwieldy to be called a sword. A slab of metal that casually broadsides anything barring a higher level apostle or magical entity. I know he didn't have it back during Golden Age, but Guts became famous as the 100-Man Slayer with his... I can't even really call it a bastard sword or his Zweihander. It's an ultra great sword, and just look at Bazuzo at the start of the arc. Guts clears him easily despite the original Onion Knight rocking full body armor. Why are standard enemies so tanky requiring 5 hits to cut apart? The whole practicality of Dragon Slayer's impracticalness is that Guts fights like a berserker. It's in the title. Before you can even think of an approach, Guts has whipped the blasted hunk of iron straight through you and your mates in a matter of seconds. No amount of armor will stop the blow, and as I said, the few that can shrug off the tool are notable in their own right. Named or titled characters. Your Zods, Grunbolds, Slans, Sea Gods, or Counts. Entities that can either match Guts blow for blow or have demonic vitality to withstand what Guts can throw at them. Dinky little robbers, armed knights, and low to mid-level monsters crumble underneath the weight of Dragon Slayer, even when Guts is outnumbered because he has high pain tolerance and can force trades. I can't escape it, but it makes sense here as Miyazaki loves Berserk. Guts rocks triple-digit poise and can eat a few hits while dishing out his own form of punishment. It takes a beating into an inch of his life from Rosin for the Holy Iron Chain Knights led by Farnese to actually capture Guts during the Conviction arc. That is an aspect of the character not at all expressed in Guts' rage, the logistics of how Guts fights, failing the Berserk license on a few levels. Firstly, on the fantasy of butchering hordes of thugs and creatures easily with a larger-than-life weapon just like Guts does. It's a chore to deal with the mobs because of Guts' problems in his moveset that I've listed above, the lack of certain abilities that I would deem key to the character, like a counter or some move that carries armor frames to facilitate trading, and all the issues surrounding how enemies interact with a player. Say hey to Millennium Falcon PlayStation 2 and Band of the Hawk, as they both make fighting fun while keeping the Berserk feel. Secondly, it once again removes details surrounding Guts' person, like how I complained about the story and the analysis, leaving him as this weird shell. Why is he so easy to stagger? Why go with a weapon of that size if it feels like a detriment in most situations? It feels like I'm simply pretending to be Guts instead of actually playing as him, like a kid picking up a stick thinking it's Dragon Slayer. It feeds on the stodginess of the controls, where this would fit more for a survival horror action title like an Onimusha, where, funnily enough, the negatives I've banged on about could be flipped around as positives, but that goes to show how differing genres can be, than a Berserk game. Suddenly, the low count of usable items becomes an aspect of survival horror opposed to a dead end, as beat-em-ups don't rely upon item or inventory management like survival horror. There's less complicated thinking involved. You need fairy dust to get anywhere in some of the later chapters in Guts' Rage due to sheer density of what's attacking you on and off screen, so to have the drops be inconsistent unless you comb hide and hair in areas you really don't want to stay around in, as it seems like enemies can respawn when they want to unless Guts' Rage forcibly locks you in an arena, means either perfect play so you never have to worry about healing, or def resetting to get dust back. It's an awful choice between a slap to the face or a punch to the gut that does the gameplay no favors, cheapening up the already pretty blatant unfairness. Guts' Rage is a suitable case study as to why the likes of Onimusha Warlords is a solid experience even with some of its hang-ups. Samanosuke's moveset is up to the task throughout the whole of the first game, rocking both basic tech that's simple to understand and advanced abilities that are hard to master but are worthwhile. Guarding is omnidirectional, allowing you to get stuck in, but it isn't an invuln option. You have to re-up it on a block, some attacks leaving you in block stun for too long to guard against a string, particularly the larger Onis and their 2 hits. There are true unblockables, and it does nothing against grabs. However, that's why you have the quick step to dodge that is pretty cancelable out of most of Samanosuke's moves and doesn't require the animation of an attack to finish, which makes Guts' dodge and jump the worst. Or the Ishin system for parries. On a just guard, or blocking right as an attack lands that isn't a grab, or an attacking as soon as an enemy does, you Ishin parry and can follow up with an instant kill on regular enemies or loads of damage on bosses. And thankfully, all the enemies in Warlords have reliable tells and reads and don't just attack when they feel like it with no startup animation, so you can't tell what they're doing until they do it. Oh yeah, Onimusha Warlords was released a year after Guts' Rage, and while not having the same linear structure, adopts the same fixed camera third-person action that the Dreamcast title does. This is a completely unrelated observation on my point, as it's not like Guts' Rage was a dry run for Onimusha, 2 different companies after all, yet it is funny how 2 parties can come up with the same outline for a game, yet handle it wildly differently. Cause Onimusha is polished to the gills, tank controls and all, while Guts' Rage is rougher than the Lost Children arc and not in the good way. There is a halfway decent concept here in Guts' Rage, marred down by all of what I've said above, plus a few other bits I'll briefly mention. The QTE is both for what they did to the industry, blame Shenmue as well, and being inconsistent when they show up, the chase sequence in its entirety for the cheap difficulty, the final boss and how piddly easy it is, and the Mandragora heart for how gimmicky it wants to be. What this was a dry run for was Millennium Falcon PlayStation 2, and at least Ukes popped off with that one. Two games already brought up in passing in comparison: Millennium Falcon PlayStation 2 and Band of the Hawk. Both consolidate the aspects of Berserk into a game better than Guts' Rage. If it hadn't been obvious, this is another title I had to opt into save states for quick saves on a pure frustration factor. Guts' sludgy controls make him a ripe target for any and everyone during the course of the adventure, with his lack of lock-on, usable guarding, and tendency to get stuck on walls or locked and hit-stun the sour notes. culminating in supreme annoyance on my part. None of the bosses or encounters are fun, as too many a time you'll be shredded into paste due to Guts' inability to react fast enough. I also think there are fundamental problems with the story that bring up the question of why way too many times, as nothing save the throwaway dilemma with Balzac ever gets elaborated on. I'm left wondering why I should even care about Guts or Casca outside of them being the main characters, which isn't a solid enough reason to get behind them. I know why I should be behind them having volumes under my belt, but the game doesn't endear the two to the player. The separation between America and Japan is never accounted nor adjusted for, asking the big question of why this was even licensed for release over here in the States. With something like Millennium Falcon PlayStation 2, I'm obviously searching it out as it's an import/playing a fan translation. I know the score. It's incredible that Guts' Rage saw release in America Turn of the Millennium without doing anything in its power to catch the players up to speed with Berserk, besides a bare minimum glossary unlocked in post. Big Bang of Wario World, as Guts' Rage might as well have been a precursor to that. Those not enlightened, the final boss for Wario World is different between American and Japanese versions, the Black Jewel resembling some form of a boss in the original JP release, compared to the lobotomized version we got in America. I think it is extremely important to highlight these wrinkles, even if today's world allows you to supersede the limitations of the past. That's how the experience originally was to a number of people, warts and all. Historical context. Like, I can watch Halloween Havoc 98 in the current without the broadcast cutting out during Goldberg DDP, but to not bring that up despite it not affecting me would be woeful on my part as an observer and analyzer. Someone back then was undoubtedly introduced to Berserk by Guts' Rage, in spite of how poor of an introduction it would have been, so to completely skimp out on that because of where Berserk is in the culture now would be half-assed. Anywho, this show is made possible with the likes of the moviegoers within the Peanut Gallery and Inner Circle. Consider buying a ticket at patreon.com/Let's Talk About Games, no apostrophe in the Let's, for behind-the-scenes access to LTA scripts, thumbnails, other bonus material, your name in the credits, and early screenings of episodes, plus the live commentary Showtime Reels, where I ramble my way through games gone by. As said at the top, like, comment, subscribe, share, or don't. I ain't your Uncle Josuke. And as always, this showing of Sword of the Berserk is over, but stay tuned for our next feature, the DS horror FPS Dementium: The Ward.